2023. I'm your chair, Ashley Catcher, Senior Engineer for Digital Workflows and Computational Design here at the institution. And before we start, I am just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping for you all. First thing to go through, is the chat and questions feature. Down at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you will see a grey bubble where you can click and post comments to everybody who is currently watching under the live chat. If you would like to ask any questions at any time, there is a little box just here. Don't know whether you can see my mouse. I think you can, but there is a little box where you can. It's a little bit hidden, but you can ask a question in there. And in that box, you can also upvote questions that you may like from other viewers. If there are any problems with the platform, or you're having any particular issues with stuttering or something similar, or if you can't hear any audio or lose slides or something, in the first instance, please refresh the browser. That solves the majority of issues, generally speaking. If the problem does persist, you're more than welcome to hit the direct chat box here and select Events Team and send a message over there, and hopefully somebody will pick that up. Or, of course, in the sort of worst instance, you can always email events@iStruct. But again, refreshing the browser helps the most. This is just a small copyright notice. The institution's best knowledge copyright permission has been provided for all material shown, and this broadcast is therefore presented all in good faith. If the copyright holder believes any permission has not been forthcoming, then the relevant item will be removed by agreement and appropriate acknowledgement provided. So we shall begin. As I said just a moment ago, I'm your chair today. My name's Ashley Catcher. I coordinate the development and application of computational methods in structural design. My background is structural engineering and the automation of sort of repetitive tasks, and also boosting creativity within the engineering field. And I'll start with Trevor to introduce actually as well. So Trevor is Director of Drawing at Work and founder of the Drawing Gym. He designs and teaches courses at esteemed firms such as Dyson, Foster and Partners, Design Museum in London, UCL, Bath, the University of Bath, and the Architectural Association. Radu Aksinte is an architect who has who currently works with Heatherwick Studio and has worked on some of the most iconic projects in London. He is a highly skilled freehand artist and watercolorist, combining sketching and digital image making for both work and pleasure. Oliver Diamond is one of the senior structural engineers at Whitby Wood, with over 9 years of experience in the industry, working in both temporary works and permanent works. He's developed a key-night construction methodology and uses digital sketches to help convey sequences, tricky details, and concepts to design client team. Something I'm sure you'll all be interested in learning about today. So, with that, I believe that's all the housekeeping. Just a reminder, you can put in your questions in the question box at any time during the presentation. You don't need to wait to the end. We will follow the presentation with a Q&A, so please do have those questions flood straight in. Okay, and with that, I shall hand over to Trevor and Radu.
Hello and good evening, everyone. This is the...
Sorry, Trevor, you will need to toggle the screen share if possible. Sorry. Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay.
All good.
If we could go into the first slide, rather, that'd be amazing. So this evening is going to be a reflection on the course that Radu and I have put together. And it's going to answer or address a couple of questions. How do you teach digital sketching? And what does the digital sketch course for engineers seek to do? Because we will be talking a little bit about the course that we'll be running for the iStruct shortly. The course itself, we can come to, and we like to reflect on the course that we've already run in 3 engineering offices just post-COVID. So we're going to reflect on that because it will have direct bearing on the pedagogy of the course and also the nuts and bolts of how you actually teach digital sketching. So the key points then, what we'd seek to do is to raise digital sketch literacy within the engineering community. Because what we've found is that digital sketching is being adopted by kind of 1 or 2 maverick people within every large company that we've worked in. But it's tending to be a little bit of a bottleneck currently. And I think that if we were to resolve the aspect of the technical side of digital sketching, then we could give people greater access. So we're seeking also to help companies develop a digital sketch capability to suit their needs and budget. And we also want to increase the odds of young engineers adopting sketching as a way of exploring and communicating ideas. And I want to put a very strong emphasis on this, that during COVID, we fast forwarded about 5 years in about what seemed like 3 weeks. And along the way, you know, digital or even engineering sketching has never really been taught to engineers. It's always learned by osmosis, by looking over somebody's shoulder and embracing certain things that are available in the culture of the office. Now, if the culture of the office is such that sketching gets somehow overlooked, then I personally feel that that is a major loss, because we're then reduced to the monoculture of the computer. And I think both in terms of an engineer's development, in the way that they communicate ideas and the way that they have ideas, the whole iterative process is so interwoven with sketching traditionally that that's what we're also seeking to somehow promote, is that young engineers adopt sketching as a way of exploring and communicating ideas. And if we can find a platform that they really enjoy visiting, then the likelihood is that they will be involved in sketching. If we can move on, Radu. Okay, so what we're going to do is show a set of drawings that show the current approaches to digital sketching, and they tend to be freehand sketches made on a screen with a stylus, or they can, in some cases, be freehand sketches that are then digitized through scanning and working on with Bluebeam annotations. So we can have a look through these. So this is a typical example. Now, we've got a number of contributors. We've got in the region of maybe 7 or 8 contributors. And what I wanted to do was to just maybe give them a name check at the end rather than go through them. But if it comes up, then that's how it is. So these are images that have been produced by Jess Ritchie, who's an engineer at Evolve, and these are some of the examples that she made to show her team how to make a freehand sketch. And then this was, I think, she was post-processing a hand sketch. And this is a similar approach. This is Alistair Frost and Eckersley O'Callaghan, and this was a construction sequence of a facade. He's a facades engineer. And then these are almost always annotated in Bluebeam. And what we're seeking to do, because Bluebeam wasn't developed as a sketching tool, it's much more to do with markups. We're looking to maybe say, is this the best way to adopt digital sketching? It's perfectly fine, but it's also constricting in some respects. This is a similar approach. This is Di Ravenscroft at Civic Engineers, and this is once again is scanning and I'm sorry, this is Simon Bennett. This is scanning existing freehand drawings, construction sequence, and then annotating and coloring. This is Di Ravenscroft, and these are all done on these are all done digitally. And I think that these were largely using Sketchbook Pro. These are Rob May of Bureau Happold, and he uses GoodNotes. He does have Sketchbook Pro and Concepts, and he's dabbled with them, he said, but he doesn't. He hasn't fully committed to them. So these are GoodNotes because he made the transition from notebooks to iPad some time back, and he's now got hundreds, if not thousands, of notes, and he keeps a note every day of projects in almost like a diary, work diary. But he also says that he uses it to to get a handle on things, to simplify them down, to come up with the essence of ideas and so on. So these are a few from his iPad. And you'll see he's also importing images and drawing over the top of them. And these are sort of typical examples of that. This is Marvin Swin, who's also Bureau, and he's a computational engineer. And what was interesting about seeing this was that he's sketching over an existing image. But this is actually him laying out, mapping all the proposed drawings that would need to be made on a project. You can see it's quite a major project. And then that's just it's like the itemization of the different kinds of drawings that would need to be made on the project. So if we can take a look at the next slides. This is Charlie Kickham, and he is a senior facades engineer, and he sent us those things over, and you can see how absolutely directly you can go from a photograph of a situation to a diagnosis of a situation, if you like. So you can see the ability to sketch over transparently is a very useful tool. Working over photographic references, and these are done in concepts and show some of the technical details that he's working through here. And this is on an iPad using concepts. And if we can take a look at the next images. Okay. So how do you teach digital sketching? Now, I guess there are as many different answers to this as there are stars in the sky, but all that we wanted to do then was to say that this is still a kind of heuristic teaching model that we're working with. We've worked with 3 different companies, and there's usually around about between 12 and 20 in the group. Now, the key thing about this is that it's subject to how many machines you can get out simultaneously in the office for people to work on. And we've worked on a range of devices. We worked initially with all kinds of different devices. We've worked with Surfaces, we've worked with iPads, we've had Wacom tablets. So what we're saying is we'd work out through iterative practice, and that's our iterative practice, the simplest way to access digital skills. And here we're trying to find a synthesis between not knocking people out with a massive technical burden, but actually finding ways that we can work through these things intuitively. And so we develop a course featuring 4 or 5 simple tools, which Radu will tell us about, that can be mastered through deliberate practice. Now, the emphasis is, I can't put this emphasis strongly enough, that it's mastered through deliberate practice. In other words, you don't try and squeeze this into your day job. You stop and you learn these skills from the ground up. So we make a set of worked examples that apply to 4 or 5 simple tools. And that's where we are with the course that we'll be offering to the iStruct team. Okay, Radu, would you like to say something?
So the main tools that we're focusing on in here are mostly related to let's say the technicalities of a digital environment, like you're using layers to expand your drawings. We're also focusing on an infinite canvas, right? So you can have unlimited amount of space to sketch and expand ideas. We have also the flexibility of importing external content in your canvas and annotate in it. You have the flexibility of importing 3D models, pictures, like some of the examples that we're showing previously. And also the flexibility to share content instantly with your team, because there's no need to scan and colorize, and it's all done and dusted. Another advantage that we realized is that you can reuse content within this pipeline, right? You can get a sketch and multiply it, adjust it, and make different iterations of the same idea and the same concept, but very easily without the need for redoing everything again. And on top of all of these 4 tools, there's the superpower of having an undo button, where if you have mistakenly drawn a line at some point, and you can undo to the back of it, compared to getting the eraser or something that's a bit more in the traditional environment. So I think those are the main 5 tools and 5 techniques that we're trying to encourage everyone to use and make use of.
Okay, great.
So these are a few examples of the techniques in practice, like getting introduced to the tools themselves, and how to color in, how to highlight the specific areas of a drawing, and annotate and highlight elements from it. Then we're going to a construction sequence. Like this is like a sequence drawing that talks about process, and also shows everyone how to reuse content from the same drawing. Like you multiply and you distribute on the canvas.
So this is the natural successor to working with tracing paper. And so what we're saying is that there is a natural and intuitive move from initially from tracing paper psyche, if you like, or tracing paper way of thinking about things, where the iterative process is pulled through successive layers. Obviously, layers is now digital, and working with layers means that you have that ability to mass produce images. So in terms of, say, a process diagram like a construction sequence, you will have your base layer, and then you can cut and paste that base layer into the next layer, and then you can show, if you like, the progression of an idea as it goes from existing through to proposed in a construction sequence. So these are classic things. So we, in the course, we run a whole session around process-based drawing, and establishing a narrative through a progression of something happening, like a spot the difference kind of approach to telling a story. Now, this is something that can we freeze that for a second, Redu? This is something that came about through the Drawing Gym course, is that we asked, a lot of this is responses to what engineers have told us in questions, is to just basically said, what would be a really useful thing to do? And some of the engineers suggested being able to sketch directly over live in meetings, possibly over satellite photos. So part of the course is we give you ordinates in Google Earth. You find the ordinates, we nail the ordinates, we rotate the image, and we sketch over the top. Now, if you've got basic drawing skills in isometric, because of the nature of Google Earth, the Google Earth isn't like a Star Wars perspective. It's an extremely gentle perspective because it's taken from some distance away. So it's just like isometric sketching. So one of the things that we decided to do was to develop an exercise where you would take off the old roof and put a new roof on an existing site. So if you want to hit that, Radu, so this is the process. So how to white out the ground once you've established it. There's the context. It can be used for, engineers, landscape architects to sketch on the same imagery. And it's like a declaration of intent, if you like, when you go to a site. So this site could be the other side of the world, and you could still have that kind of conversation.
Sorry. There you go. That's finished product.
Okay, so that's quite an enabling tool. And the thing that I'd like to stress is that this is very much aimed, although we will be pulling in experienced engineers, this is very much a kind of tool that we would hope that we could give to young engineers, and they would basically come up with all kinds of things that we had no idea they could do, because there are so many incredible features to digital sketching. Can we move on? Okay, what we're also doing is we're presenting some course support files. Maybe, Radu, if you wanted to tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah. So as part of each individual lecture, you'll get a step-by-step support file that shows basically the software interface and how you can get from the initial imported image or the initial imported exercise to the final result by following instructions and clearly highlighted. So it's like a guide. It's more like an IKEA instruction kit, where at the beginning you end up with you start with just a blank sheet of paper, and then at the end you end up with a diagram, having gone through all of the tools and all of the necessary techniques to get that kind of diagram.
I think we felt that we wanted to give people as much, as big a chance as possible of retaining this information. And although we're talking specifically about the course that we want to run at the iStruct, we're also talking about heuristic teaching models, in that we are doing this in response to students that we've worked with over the period of the last couple of years. And initially, there was no time for careful consideration. We haven't optimized the results because it's still a work in progress, because it's a complex and perpetually changing scenario that we're working with in the digital environment, because everybody has their own ways, everybody has their own favorites, every office has its own office culture, its own relationship to drawing. And so we felt it was necessary that once we had established an app that we were going to work with, that we publish some basic support files of using that app, so that you would never be adrift. You'd never have that embarrassing moment where you had to stop the whole course because there's something that you've misunderstood. So you can have these things on your phone when you're working through this, and they're also going to be worked on a screen. We'll show you some examples of some of the classes that we've run, and that may help explain it. But Radu's just going to show us a few more sketches.
So that on the left hand side, it's again an example from the first course where people are annotating and highlighting parts of the diagram. Also an example of an isometric sketch with some trusses that are using exactly the same techniques but applied on an isometric diagram. One of the course guys did.
Yeah, these are some examples that once we've shown a rudimentary way of using the kit, especially on construction sequence, these are some of the quick diagrams using that repeat tool, using the layers and then building up images and then showing the changes of images.
And again, this is the same kind of technique, but applied in a different environment. So it shows a study section of a balcony in different scenarios, with drainage, without drainage. So again, it's an exercise that was done after the course, and these are examples of how this could be used for different design solutions. Again, a diagram highlighting what I think this was done with a hybrid of a sketch directly on a 3D model where you kind of had the zone available, and then you just see if everything would work out within the allowed buildup. So that's one of the techniques.
So this is a typical scenario that we're going to be showing through, and this is Hayne Tillett Steel, and so this is the case in point. They were working with Surface Pro, and they already had them in the office, and we found we could get, I think, 14 at once. So that means then that we can bring in the social dimension, we can get people responding to other people, and we'll get that cumulative thing of more than the sum of the parts. So you don't feel like you're in your room learning from a YouTube tutorial. It's very much a social scenario. And you can see in the bottom left there that we've got that very thing of somebody looking at the screen and also consulting the PDF that's on his phone that everybody has access to throughout. So it's a reasonably well-oiled system, and we keep people, we attend to people, and we make sure people don't get into glitches along the way. So next up is this was Eckersley O'Callaghan, and in this office they had 20. They had some old Wacom pads, as I remember, and in conversation we said, yeah, we could probably use the Wacom pads. There's a slight disconnect between what you draw and the screen with them, and they can feel slightly cumbersome, but we managed to overcome that. But if you look up to the top of the screen, you'll see that somebody is drawing directly on a Wacom that is separate to the screen, while others in the same group were drawing on surfaces that allowed them much more interactive, much more like iPads with Wacom surfaces. And this is like a typical scenario. So when I seem to remember, this is how we did it. This Radu was in, you weren't even in England at the time.
No.
He not only was he in Romania, but he also had COVID, and he was teaching with great dedication and public spirit. but there were lots of people. You can see this was it was just after COVID, but people were checking in from different parts of the country, and we were running it on Teams as well as live. So it's incredibly flexible as a teaching resource to teach digital sketching. So we were quite excited by that. And these were some examples of some other technical details that can be made.
Yeah.
This is one aspect that I think we're excited by, or that I certainly was excited by, is that you can take something that would normally exist only in a plan or in an elevation, and you can in no time at all turn it into a 3D sketch. So this compresses imagery, turns them into isometric, axonometric, in much the same way that one would with tracing paper. Now, I think we want to hand over to Oliver, who we met at Whitby Wood when he did the course, and we've been in touch with Oliver subsequently, and he's been telling us a little bit about how he's been using digital sketching as a result. So Oliver's a senior structural engineer at Whitby Wood, and there's his bio. He's had 9 years in the industry, and so he's been interested and excited by different ways that he can rework sketches to incorporate feedback and to experiment with different styles. So we're going to hand you over to Oliver Diamond. Oliver.
Thanks, Trevor and Radu. Hi, everybody. Yeah, just wanted to start by saying that sketching is a really important part of my work as a structural engineer. I use it every day, whether it's a scribble on a page or a well-developed sketch. The old cliche remains true, which is a picture says 1,000 words. I think often sketches start a conversation, and as Radu said, it's important to be able to rework a sketch to respond to feedback. So the great thing about digital sketching is you can employ non-destructive techniques. So by using layers, you can work up different versions of the same sketch, which is what you're seeing here. So I'm briefly going to talk about the different scenarios that I've found I've used sketching for. And just to say that the sketches that I'm going to be talking about, they've all been done on either an iPad Pro with Procreate as the software, or they were done on a Surface Pro, and I've used either Autodesk Sketchbook or PowerPoint. It's actually quite a rudimental but powerful sketching piece of software. So these sketches were to convey different concepts for some light industrial units at Reba Stage 2. So there's 4 options: a steel frame, glulam portal frames, a CLT kind of panelized building, and a glulam CLT hybrid. It was important that these sketches were very visual to inspire the client and design team and get them to buy into one of these ideas. To create these, I used Procreate, and I used the feature which was the isometric grid. So you can put that on, and then you can snap to it. So it makes it really easy to draw isometric drawings. The one bit that you have to turn it off for is a pitched roof, because that's not on one of the 3 planes that it snaps to. And basically, to form these, I created a base layer with a basic skeleton of the building, and I used that to trace over, and that would be switched off on the final version of the drawing. I'd say with these, they were quite probably time consuming to produce, so it was important that the concept of the sketch was thought through before you even put pen to paper or pad. So with these, I wanted to show for the different options what we were doing with a beam, column, wall, cladding. You'll notice there's a tree with a root protection area. That was an important aspect to convey. And I wanted to show a sort of partial cutaway to show these different aspects of the building. And then in the middle, you might not be able to see them very well, but these were just some very quick sketches to give some different ideas on what the roof profiles could potentially be. The one thing I sort of found in doing all of this is that you have to be a little bit careful with zooming in too much and focusing on a detail that might not be read when you finally zoom out and you see the whole picture. Next slide, please. So these are also sort of conceptual sketches. This was actually for a bid submission for a small building at the end of a long pier. And the interesting thing about this was that the weather conditions that these buildings could be constructed in were, well, it was quite exposed. So we wanted to use sketches to convey different different ideas to different how we could construct the building in different ways to respond to potential weather conditions. So the series of diagrams along the bottom basically highlight different approaches that we could have gone with. So on the left, there's sort of an elemental on-site construction, which might be appropriate in most weather conditions, but it could be slow, and delivering materials to the end of this pier is just a bit of a logistical issue to overcome. In the center, we've got sort of panelized construction working through to sort of fully prefabricated walls and floors, and then finally a full prefabricated building that could be installed. So yeah, I think with this, I was actually using architectural renders that had already been produced, and I was tracing over the top. I was just using our Whitby wood orange to try and highlight, yeah, the different elemental sizes that we were discussing in the narrative of this submission. And then I arranged these sketches in Bluebeam, I think. This is showing some sort of more traditional detailed sections. So with these, I used a grid to set the overall scale. I think it's important to always try and draw to a scale. And these were actually to convey some different party wall conditions that we had in an existing and proposed way. So again, I was using layers to work up one version of a sketch, and then turning off layers to adjust some details. I think it was good to have worked out a good palette, a color palette, to sort of pick out different material types. And I suppose with this, could have potentially have been done in something conventional like Revit, but we didn't have full information in model form of what the building was on the other side of the party wall. So it was more appropriate to draw these directly from photos, which is why this was a good tool to use. Next one, please. This is just showing a bit of a construction sequence, which required some precise notching work and slightly unusual sequence to fix on this bracket. Again, I think I was using the isometric grid in Procreate for this, and then I put the notes on afterwards to make sure that I'd given them a bit of thought and they were nice and concise and they could be adjusted when they'd been reviewed. So that was that one. Next one, please. Sort of terming this a bit of a conversation starter. I think these kind of sketches can be pretty quick to put together, and the purpose was to fire these off in an email to discuss that what we were showing was our understanding of how something might be built or how objects would go together. Some things that I quite liked about this one was I've just found this nice highlighter type shader, and yeah, I just sort of liked how it looks pretty close to a traditional highlighter. Yeah, and I think the good thing about that one was that I sent it off and the architect was able to then just put their comments directly on the sketches and send them back. So it was useful for having a conversation. This is just showing feasibility for an excavation on a constrained site. For this, I used a Revit view, which had quite a lot of useful info of the site in it already. And that was just to give the context of the site and the scale. And then the thing that we wanted to convey was how the plant would move around this constrained site. So I loaded in actual images of plant and set them to the correct scale, and then just traced over them to create these little blocks that I could then move around and put where I wanted, because they'd be on different layers. And then I've just sort of used arrows and a few choice kind of annotations to convey what the sequence and movements would be of these bits of equipment. Yep, next one, please. So this is actually done in PowerPoint, and yeah, similar to what Radu was showing earlier. It's a Google image snapshot, but we're putting this into PowerPoint because PowerPoint's great at sort of copying and pasting something in the exact same space between slides. It's also got some nice pen options, so you can set the thickness of pens. So you can have a nice thin pen, a medium-sized pen, and a thick pen. And then it's great because you're building up a slide deck which tells a story, which is then ideal for sort of subsequent meetings where you're trying to bring people along on a journey and explain to them what the particular constraints are on a site. So that's how we've used digital sketching, but in quite a practical and quick way. Thank you. Yeah, that's about it for me.
Thanks, Oliver. We wanted to bring the course to a kind of conclusion, and one of the things that we would be reflecting on is our experience of teaching the course, and also our, if you like, the anecdotal evidence that we've got of the way that people are using the stuff now compared to how we might say how they could be using it to boost output, to boost competitive advantage, and so on. Now, we are doing this through the lens of the course that we've been teaching. But the larger issues, if you like, are some of the things that digital sketching will enable us to do. And so if we work on this pyramid, these are some of the things that we think that people may actually go up through the gears once they are familiar with some of the basic digital sketching tools. And so there is traditional sketching, so the mastery of drawing skills, some rudimentary drawing skills that can then enable you to make sketch notes. So these are the kinds of conversational sketches that one can then make in client meetings live with others. Excuse me. There's a whole range of new approaches to markups that doesn't necessarily mean that one would revert immediately to Bluebeam, because that Bluebeam is not a sketching tool. And if we were to say that there's definitely potential within the digital sketch gamut to embrace markups possibly in a more fruitful and creative way, working through concept sketches, design options, idea generation, and then working through to live sketching, meeting markups, and so on. And we're very interested in hearing people's feedback about how they are currently using digital sketching. We'd be very interested to hear that currently. And so these are some of the options that we've found. along the way. So as I've said, this is anecdotal. We're not proposing how people should be working with, but we are going to give you a sort of table of some of the options that are out there and some of our experience of the way that people are using them. So Sketchbook Pro, a couple of years ago, was around. It seemed to be around, and as was Procreate, Morpholio, and Concepts. But this was the tool initially when we sent out emails to the industry to say, what are you sketching with? These were the answers that came back to us. So we haven't gone into this in any prescriptive way. We've responded to who at the time was using what, and therefore we'd say, okay, so this seems to be the way that it's breaking. So we'll try Sketchbook Pro, but we could equally have gone down a Procreate, Morpholio, or Concepts route. Now this is changing, you know, week by week. It's a perpetually changing scenario. And we are simply reflecting on our experience over the last couple of years of working in that environment. So if we could go to which device. Now, at the time of printing, this was about a week or two ago, these are some of the conversations that we've been having with officers and with individuals, some of whom we've mentioned tonight, some of the individuals that are working. And so, you know, this has changed once again recently, and it's subject to what people tell us they're using, rather than something that we would necessarily endorse, because we don't at this stage want to be seen to be endorsing anything. What we want to do is to reflect back to people what our experience has been. So these are the options that we've listed 8, and there may well be more, but these are the most commonly used. These are the most commonly used devices and apps in the engineering industry, to our knowledge. Not in architecture, not in the games industry, not in product design, but actually in engineering. And so working from a Wacom pen tablet, which we've said is extremely crude, through a Cintiq, which is a smaller refinement of it, and then working through, if you like, in a kind of hierarchy, through to more expensive options like the Latitude. Now, there's been interesting conversation even in the last few weeks, has been around working with the Surface Pro, because Surface Pro seems to be the go-to surface of choice in several engineering offices. And it is a wonderfully responsive and intuitive tool compared to, comparable to iPad Pro. But it doesn't necessarily have the staying power of a Latitude, of a Dell Latitude, which can take massive files in a way that the Surface Pro can't necessarily. So, there are pros and cons to each of these different options. And we're looking to chat to hear your experiences of what you've been working with, and we want to quickly go into the summary then. So this is back to our course, and once again, the purpose of this talk is not to plug our course, but this is some of the values that we attach to sketching, and the idea has been to find a simple and an attractive way to access digital sketching skills with worked engineering examples. And so the 4 or 5 simple features that Radu mentioned earlier that we would encourage people to become fluent with is much in the framework of reestablishing sketching rather than marking up tools as a necessary iterative process. So we wanted to demonstrate that given the right equipment, even low budget like Wacom, people will enjoy the creative boost and use sketching more purposefully in a digital workflow. And I think that pretty much concludes what we have to say, and maybe what we have to say can be expanded now through what you have to say. So I'm very interested to hear some of the questions that people have back. Thanks very much.
Right. Thank you very much, Trevor, Radu, and excuse me, sorry, I need a drink of water. Sorry, thank you, Trevor, Radu, and Oliver. Very interesting. I think we should all jump onto the cameras now, just to have a quick chat and go through some of these questions. And I'll just pop mine on as well. So, Radu, you're slightly out of frame for me. I'm not sure whether
Let's
that's
move over a bit.
Hello. Perfect. You've gone through a fair number of bits and bobs. I have to say, I'm already a convert to digital sketching, so I'm very biased in this sense, and I will say that the practical aspects of drawing and learning to draw on a screen are slightly different to drawing with pen and paper, in the sense that the responsiveness and the sort of tactile feedback is very different. There was a question here with regards to sort of the translation between sort of freehand sketching over to digital sketching. What are the challenges of transferring those sort of skills over? Do you need to have a deep understanding of sorry, we're getting a little bit of noise from your microphone, Radu, Trevor. Yeah, perfect, brilliant. Sorry, just make sure you unmute it as soon as you begin to respond. So I suppose I'm asking what the question is really: what's the translation process from physical drawing, like manual, physical, in real world drawing, to digital sketching? What are the challenges involved with that? And sort of, is it cross-directional? Can you go from digital sketching over back to sort of hand sketching on paper? Are there any problems with going that way around versus, what are the challenges effectively? So I'll put that to you all and respond.
Thanks, Ashley. That's actually a good question, because they're almost the same thing, but using two different medias. I would say that you need to know how to sketch, but you shouldn't be afraid of it at the beginning as a platform, regardless of where you do it. And I'm thinking that digital sketching is a bit more forgiving, that you can erase easily, you can undo, and that is almost it's almost addictive when you get to it, having that undo button every time. And you get to the reality of sketching with a pen where you can't erase. So that's off the bat, that's the point that I wanted to make about this. But also the skills are also transferable, because the exercise that you get into digital sketching is transferable to hand sketching, because it's the same hand movement, same tool, same everything. So it almost encourages each other to progress.
I think I've found that with things like drawing aids, where you can snap to planes, it is helpful. If you don't feel like you can draw a straight line, then there's an aid that can help you draw a straight line. And the thing with being able to just erase something very easily and then just draw it again, it's really forgiving.
And if I could add to that, I still use these circle templates on my drawing tablet, genuinely, and they work absolutely fine, providing you keep the stylus close to the actual stylus close to the screen, and you're not sort of like pinching and zooming all over the place. So I still have a collection of these, which of course I was using before in practice, but I use them for digital sketching now. So people may see me on the train being very confused about using a ruler on a screen, but I still do it.
It just proves that you can use both techniques easily and to do the same thing, communicate ideas faster.
I think also what it points to is individual eccentricities, and I think that one of the things that drawing never will become, hopefully, is standardized. And I think it's important that we recognize that engineering is an art as well as a science, and we don't lose track of that, because I mean, I see a lot of sketches throughout my average week because I go into offices and I see what people are drawing. We don't see a great deal of sketching taking place because a lot of what we see is the finished product because it's kind of doubling up as marketing for the project. And so we don't see the early scruffy diagrams. The first equation that we had on the screen was, what is the value of a sketch? And I said the utility over the time it takes to produce. And quite often a sketch will have a shelf life of about 20 minutes in a meeting, but it was critical at that time or else you'd have had nothing to respond to. And I think that fast turnover of drawings is something that is not very widely acknowledged anymore. And everybody talks about it, but sometimes we talk a good game. And my fear is that there's a whole generation of young engineers who are going to miss the boat unless we give them a hand up. And if we can make that pleasurable, through this play aspect of sketching on a digital surface, there's a greater likelihood that there won't be that generational gap. So they will hook on to sketching and get as excited by it as other people have been for, 500 years.
Well, it sort of brings us on to one of the other questions, actually, in that sense. That sort of, well, the aspect of standardization versus sort of the hand sketching and sort of the understanding and growth of those ideas through sketching, I suppose, in a sense. I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I strongly believe that a lot of engineers are very numbers and sort of quite visually oriented as thinkers. So to grow a design, from a personal perspective, I design things by sketching them out, realizing that doesn't work, and then sketching something else out.
Yes.
So I think it's quite powerful that we have the undo functions. But does that mean that the scale of the drawing doesn't matter? I mean, there's a question here which talks about whether on how to scale things in digital drawings, because of course you can zoom in as much as you ever want to, or you can zoom out as much as you want to, and sort of how the practicalities of working to scale work on a digital tablet. When you have an A3 sheet in front of you, you know exactly how big it is, whereas on a digital canvas, it's very, very difficult to sort of gauge and understand what's going on. So how do you work in scale? Oliver, I know you mentioned this previously, so I don't know whether you'd like to start on this one.
Yeah, so the software that I've been using a lot is Procreate on the iPad, and that has built-in grids that you can switch on, and you can make them very visible or just very faint, and you can change the scale of them. So you've essentially just got it's like having squared paper, but you can change the size of the squares. But as long as you decide what a square represents, so that could be 100 mil or that could be a meter, and you kind of decide on that and you don't change that, that's how I would draw to scale. So you pick that and then you draw. Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. I don't know whether anybody knows of any other similar software for.
Yeah.
I know people don't necessarily all have iPads or Apple Macs as such. For Windows or Android, and what sort of actually, what's the personal preference for all of you in terms of digital sketching? Of course, Oliver, you've just said Procreate, but are there similar things for other platforms, and sort of what are your preferred pieces of software?
Oliver, do you want to finish off on that? If there's anything else on Procreate before Double?
I think I've said quite a lot about Procreate, but I know that a colleague of mine swears by PowerPoint with its simplicity. It's just that it does everything it needs to do. It's got pens, and you can choose the thickness of pens and keep them on your bar at the top. So that means you're always drawing with some consistency, like your PowerPoint page never changes size, so your pen thickness is always the same.
It's also to do with, because you're using a pen to do a specific task, right? You're using a pencil to do a specific task, and I think of apps being in a similar way, like you're using a specific app to do a specific thing. Like the range is slightly broader. Say, for example, as you said, Procreate is very artistic and very flexible. It can do a lot of things. It can have layers, merge layers, blend layers. It's very fluid in that way. My top three would be Procreate as one of them. Concepts is also a nice one, and mainly to do with the fact that it's a vector-based sketching tool. So your brush stroke, when you're sketching it, if you feel like there's something wrong with it, you can nudge it in the right place and give it a nice thickness to it, or change the thickness. So it's a bit more of an organic thing. It has different levels of undos. You're almost like sketching in both directions at the same time. You're sketching in with a pen, but also that pen you can reuse it to do something else. So that I think that's very powerful. You can also scale it because it's a vector. So I'm starting to like that a lot. Also, sketching to scale, it depends how you want to do it. Say, for example, if you want on the same sheet, you want a 1 to 100 and a 1 to 5, just to zoom into it. You can blow up, and as Oliver was saying, you set the grid to the right scale that you want, and then multiply it to what you need. So I think all platforms almost do that now. There's also Morpholio in there that has a ruler, so it will tell you automatically what the size of the sketch you're doing, like what's the scale of your sketch.
Morpholio, is that
Morpholio
right?
trace, yeah.
Morpholio.
There's a lot of them. Let's say I'm looking at my iPad at the moment and searching for the list. I've got like a folder of sketching apps. Bluebeam is one of them, just to see what it can do, and you know, I still believe it's a great markup tool, but not a sketching tool.
Yeah, I think engineers might be quite familiar with Bluebeam generally, and so the capabilities of Bluebeam are probably reasonably well understood. I think from a digital sketching perspective, it's the freehand aspects are probably less explored by engineers, because of course Bluebeam works in a very sort of similar way too, but I wouldn't say quite similar, but it's very
There's
definite.
one thing, Ashley, that I might add, which is that the course that we're proposing for the iStruct is very much based on our findings in the industry of what people were using, and that was Sketchbook Pro. So the iStruct course will be orientated using Sketchbook Pro, but the exercises that we do and Sketchbook Pro can be, you can work on Apple or a Windows platform, but they are transferable skills, because we're using kind of 5 techniques that you can take it into Morpholio, you can take it into concepts according to what your personal preference is. Now, on the one hand, I'm responding to some of the chat already, where people are saying these are all very neat drawings, and of course they don't need to be neat drawings, because if you're in a meeting scenario, you don't have the time to make a neat drawing, in which case things like, you know, like Peter O'Connor said, a Microsoft Whiteboard is something that you can respond to in live meetings. You can get really quick drawings out very quickly. But what we're also looking at, and we shouldn't be afraid to explore, is how you can actually turbocharge the whole drawing scenario with a powerful tool that architects use as second nature, but engineers aren't necessarily looking at. Now, that may be enshrined forever in the culture of engineering, but it doesn't have to be. There could be ways that generations of engineers that adopt these techniques find all kinds of other uses for them. I mean, the way that Bluebeam has expanded exponentially is largely through habit formation and trying to make it do lots and lots of other things that it wasn't designed for. Whereas the new apps almost so these new apps are designed for that. But you know, drawn with great, you know, working on Bluebeam with great ingenuity and curiosity. And what if I do this to it? And what if I do that? Within a very limited set of options. Now these options are massive, and it gives some people vertigo. You don't know where to start with this thing. And that's why we've said we're just going to go with 4 or 5 things. And if you like it, the chances are you'll want to explore it further. So it's very much a foundational thing. And it's largely, we both love sketching. And that's largely what's prompted it, is that we want to continue and move sketching through. You know, don't let's lose contact with sketching. It's such a critical and valuable thing. I have no nostalgia whatsoever for sketching. If it has to go, it has to go. But I see all kinds of incredible usage of sketches still in what engineers are producing. So this is our way of stacking the odds so that sketching does prevail.
Well, it sort of brings us on to quite an interesting question, actually, because with regards to sort of applications, we've just mentioned a couple. That includes, sorry, for those of you who didn't catch it, the first one was Procreate, which is available now on iPad. Morpholio, I'm not sure whether that's cross-platform or not, but it's definitely, it is. Concepts is also cross-platform as well. There are various other apps as well. Adobe Fresco, I believe, is one of them. I use one personally called Infinite Painter. But in terms of hardware, for example, you mentioned, of course, you've got iPads and Surface Pros and various other things, but and rightly in the chat, people have mentioned that, well, some of these are quite expensive. So from a sort of somebody who's just coming into this, not sure whether they can really get to grips with the digital aspect of things and perhaps just want to try it out a little bit, what sort of things would you potentially recommend, and what sort of things do you use in the course? That's interesting.
Well, so far, some people have been using surfaces, and once again, I stress that we don't go in with a long list of recommendations. We respond to what the offices have got, and so in some cases they have surfaces already, so we orientated around surfaces. In some places they didn't. They had some surfaces and some Wacom pads, so we worked with the Wacom pads. And the Wacom pads are, 150, 160 quid or something, as opposed to thousands of pounds. But of course, they're nothing like as intuitive, and they're slightly clunky. And in some experiences, it's like trying to, I mean, this is very pejorative, but it's like trying to peel an orange in boxing gloves. It's like the Wacom pads there's such a disconnect in some respects that it will put you off forever. And in some cases, we're working with offices where they bought the Wacom pads 3 years ago and never used them because people didn't like them.
Yeah, I guess it's if you're starting with digital sketching and it's your first experience, there's that disconnect of sketching in here, but looking over there. So your hand is not really, you're not really looking at the brush strokes per se. So looking at how people reacted in the workshops and in the lectures, you could see that disconnect. And we had side by side people that are sketching on an iPad, right? And when they on a surface, when they sketch on screen, they actually sketch on screen. And there was almost like a perceived fear of trying to do a brush stroke while looking at the screen and trying to coordinate the angle of the tablet with the
it is an acquired skill. I know because I've got one.
Exactly. So I'm totally with you, Ashley, because I've been through that pain when tablets were not a thing, and I could sketch on Wacom, but it does take time. So as a first experience, if you're coming to that, it is a bit daunting to start with that experience, which is the cheapest of the levels, right? That's like the entry fee.
Yeah, I sort of, to add to that, I wanted to get your perspective as well. But there are other Android tablets which are available for around about £200, especially some of the older ones, which again have stylus input and such, because somebody was asking about passive screens, and I don't know about anybody speaking here today, but in the past I've always tried to use passive screens and very fine digitized styluses and such. What tends to happen is it's actually worse than the Wacom, because wherever your nib is, the screen tends to offset it and various other things. So
Exactly.
from a personal perspective, I wouldn't use them, and I've gone through several in my time, so I just would not use them.
What
Cheap
what we also
Android
realized with these
tablet.
almost like entry level, low end, like a Cintiq, for example, if it almost doesn't keep up with the brushstroke, so
There's lots of lag. Yeah.
there's always a bit of lag between them, and if you sketch a bit and you can do a markup, that might be fine. But if you're sketching day in, day out, it starts to become like this droplet thing that you kind of starts to annoy you, and at some point you just go like, is it worth saving X amount of money for that nuisance, perpetual nuisance? But these are things that some people will be annoyed by and some people can live with, so it's totally up to the individual to choose what's their preference of medium. What we're trying to say is that there's a range of options, right, from entry level Wacom and a laptop or a computer to the full shebang of having an iPad or a Latitude touchscreen that you can sketch on it.
Yeah,
I think one other thing just to say is that you could have one of these tools and share it within an office environment.
That's very common.
It's not that everybody has to have one. A place where I previously worked, they had one iPad, and everybody got used to it, and it worked quite well until people get quite fond of it, and then they want to use it all the time.
It does tend to become the personal communal tablet.
Yeah. Well, in that sense, I mean, the whole sort of being able to sketch something perhaps by hand, scan it in, and then work up that sketch bar on a digital platform can be quite powerful in that sense, because essentially you've done a lot of the base work initially. You can do that while somebody else is using the iPad, and then perhaps you swap over and do something similar. It's very similar to the whole blue crayon thing you used to do, because you just scan it in and you're good to go. I will mention something I just thought about with regards to scale, actually. A lot of these applications, you can actually import PDF backgrounds into the background. So you can have your title block and various other bits and bobs, and have a grid as well on top of that, so if you need to, with regards to scale, and then you can effectively output a drawing which is ready in your firm's title block and such.
Yeah, and you can save that as a template as well, have that ready to open, so you're always drawing on something that's on brand and to scale.
Yeah, and you sort of know the bounds of your page almost, which is quite handy, actually. I personally find, at least I know I'm in the corner or something. Oliver, you mentioned, I think this is more or less one of the last questions. I think we've covered most of it with regards to software, scales, and operating systems and sketching techniques. To the person asking about free sketching tools, many of the Android apps and the Windows applications are actually free. Sketchbook Pro is free, I think, as well. So there are plenty out there. Adobe Fresco as well, but that's more for painting. There are dozens of free apps available. There was one question which I found particularly interesting with regards to 3D sketching. Oliver, you've mentioned previously that you sketched onto sort of effectively a scanned-in background of the architect's drawing or something similar. Somebody's mentioned in the chat that they use Rhino, for example, to mock up a 3D model or something similar. With regards to 3D sketching, that's sort of two aspects to this. There are, number one, is there a preferred sort of methodology to drawing on 3D? Or like, would you create a model first and then perhaps sort of take a snapshot of it and then draw on top of it, and also can you sketch in 3D itself? So to be able to turn that sketch around onto different faces of perhaps a building and draw on each face, if that makes sense, and be able to sort of get an idea as to what sort of is going on there. You're
cool.
still muted. Trevor and Ruddy, you're still muted. Sorry.
Can I jump in with an answer to that? This has been probably 15 years that people have been doing this. I'm thinking of some of the. It sounds like this is one long plug for the courses that I teach, and I'll try and resist then mentioning names, but architects make Revit models. They send, and then if the engineer is in a good relationship with that architect, they can specify a section cut through that Revit model that they will then gray out, put their entire scheme on, and send back. And then you can rotate the hell out of it. And you can say, I'm going to put this through 3 rotations. I want this view, and this view, please. So the architect then sends them those views, and then that's a wonderfully prescribed, made to measure, drawn communication between those 2 offices, between architects and engineers. And they can be MEP engineers, they could be structures engineers, they could be landscape engineers, and they all work from the same core Revit drawing.
It's like BIM for sketching.
Yeah, that sounds really handy. Oliver, unless you've got anything to add, I think we're going to go to some of the closing resources.
I think, yeah, definitely drawing over a 3D model that you might have thrown together very quickly is definitely a valid technique. I'd say that some of the visualizations that you can get in, say, SketchUp now look very much like a 3D sketch. So it's arguable whether you would go to the effort of drawing over something that you've modeled. But I think it really depends how complicated the thing is that you're trying to draw, whether you can visualize it without modeling it. Yeah.
Okay. Right.